It's been a long and gruelling contest. We've had hours of hustings, social media spats, policy rows. Stitching the Conservative Party back together again is not going to be easy. Well, our next guest knows better than most how Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are going to be feeling today. He lost in 2005 to David Cameron. I hate to remind you of that, of course.
That's all right.
David Davis, thank you very much for being with us. Well, it looks pretty certain, doesn't it, that Liz Truss will be the next leader of your party. How do you think she's going to get on?
It looks likely. I mean, we're not sure until we see the ballots, of course, and it's a really difficult electorate to censor. Look, she faces probably the second most difficult brief in the post-war prime ministers. I mean, the only person with a worse brief coming in was Margaret Thatcher, I think. The country was bankrupt and all sorts of other problems. But so she's got this huge set of problems. Obviously, the cost of living crisis, backing off from Ukraine, and also within that, the energy crisis, really, really difficult. I actually don't think any of the candidates, not one of them going through it, really knows quite how big this is going to be. It's going to be on a par with the furlough scheme in terms it's going to be tens of billions of costs. It's going to be rewriting markets. It's going to be intervening.
And that's what you think should happen? That's
what should happen. It has to happen. I mean, we worry about, and we talk a lot in politics about the vulnerable. Of course, they are the most important to deal with, but also small businesses and businesses generally, employment. The whole economy is going to take a shock if you haven't sorted it out. So that's got to be done, and that's huge. And it'll involve, to some extent, putting your ideologies on one side. We're all free marketeers. We're all low tax enthusiasts. I mean, me more than most, I guess. But we're going to have to think, well, actually, for this next 12 months, going to do something different. So you've got that coming, and then a whole pack of other things behind it.
On the tax cuts, I'm interested because, as you say, you are someone who ideologically like the idea of tax cuts and believe in low taxes. Liz Truss, of course, has talked a lot about low taxes as the way forward. But do you think that actually that is not the right thing to do in the short to medium term because of the crisis? Well,
I mean, the first thing to understand, if we talk about tax cuts, what she's talking about is cancelling tax increases. That's the first thing, and it is quite an important difference. I'm not too worried about the national insurance cancellation. Actually, that will now end up, given the way that Rishi amended it, as being a net tax cut, because he's taken 70% of people out of it. The corporation tax, I think they're going to have to think quite hard about, actually. I'd like a low headline tax, but these days, vast amounts of corporate money goes to buying back shares and propping up their own share price and so on. We've got to think about how that works. So there's quite a lot to be done there, but in principle, it's the right direction. But she's going to find balance in the books really difficult. If I'm right about the costs of the energy crisis, tens upon tens of billions of pounds, not in the long term, but in the short term. And you add to that the necessary increase in defence costs because of Ukraine. You add to that the necessary increase in NHS costs. It's going to be quite difficult to make the books balance. And the worst outcome is, as it were, to give low taxes a bad name by going down a route which leads to an increase in interest costs, massive increases in people's mortgages, and/or a decline in the pound. The pound's been going down systematically over the last year or so. If it drops off a cliff, then we're going to have more inflation. So that this is a really, really difficult balancing job. It's not for nothing that Margaret Thatcher actually put taxes up earlier in her years. Now, I don't think that's the right thing to do either, but it's difficult. The point I'm making is a knife-edge calculation she has to make. I
mean, as you say, it is difficult. It's a very difficult outlook. It's going to be a bumpy road, whoever ends up winning tomorrow. Can you say with 100% certainty that whoever wins tomorrow, assuming it's Liz Truss, will lead the Conservative Party into the next election?
That's only 2 years away, so it's a sort of 90-something% probability. But more pressing than that, in a way, is what you sort of intimated when you introduced me. And that is that there is a real risk the party will sort of feel divided, And that means if that's the case, we won't win the next election. And so it's going to be really important that she pulls people in.
So what do you think that the Cabinet needs to involve different people from different factions of the party? I mean, look, would you like to see Rishi Sunak offered a job?
I would. I mean, look, the greatest mistake that Boris Johnson made, I mean, there were a few, but right back at the beginning, and it sort of slightly shocked me, was the fact that he basically created a cabinet of loyalists. You know, it wasn't a meritocratic cabinet. It wasn't the best people. You know, Jeremy Hunt was offered a demotion, so obviously didn't take it. Others like Liam Fox or indeed Penny Mordaunt wasn't in cabinet. You know, which absolutely justified a place. And there were other. I could give you a list of half a dozen who should have been there and who might have talked to him and talked him out of some of the silly things he did, ranging from some of the mistakes on COVID through to the mistakes on handling the House of Commons.
And looking at the people who were talked about as being in the next Liz Truss cabinet, are you worried she was going to make the same mistake?
I'm slightly worried. I think that, look, it's always tempting, you know, if you're going to win this sort of thing, you've had people who've been around you since the beginning. You want to be loyal to them, and so on. But actually, your loyalty is to a bigger entity. Your loyalty is to the country and the party, and that's hard. That's hard to do on the first day. So what kind of job do you think? I think she has to brace herself and do it.
What kind of job do you think Rishi Sunak, for example, should be offered?
Well, you could offer him Foreign Secretary. He'd do that very well. She won't want to put him back in as Chancellor because they have very different views on that, and that's public. I mean, something very senior. So in the top half dozen, anyway.
Do you think that she might be tempted to call an early election?
No, actually. Everybody talks about it. The opposition, of course, always call for it as well. But no, I mean, we've got an 80 majority, you know. There was a suggestion when Boris was going out, as it were, that he might call an election. And the suggestion came right back from the palace, and we may not grant one. You know, the conditions for an election are you need to have one to deliver a majority in the House of Commons. There aren't that need at the moment.
And finally...